Good evening from Wolfville and Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Our virtual events series has been a tremendous success so far this year in reaching out to our alumni in these times that we find ourselves in. The event this evening will be the last of our every 2-week sessions as we take a break in the month of May only from the series in order to host our annual general meeting for the Alumni Association, as well as present an Alumni Association Awards celebration on May 31st. My name is Una Proudfoot, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Affairs in the Office of Advancement at Acadia. And I'm delighted to be here this evening with Dr. Jon Saklofske, who will be sharing his research with us in inviting questions and engagement from our audience. Before we get started, though, I would like to share just a few housekeeping rules for folks who are new to the event series. And that is when you dial in, as many of you already have, please mute yourselves and disable your cameras. We ask you to do that during the presentation part so that we have extra bandwidth. Still, as I've said all the way along, I don't really know what that means. I just know it's a thing. And then when Jon is done presenting, we encourage you, if you have questions, to enable your microphone and ask your questions, or you can launch the chat function, which is the wee icon that looks like a text bubble. If you just click on that, that will, as I say, launch your chat function, and you are welcome to write questions there, and I'll keep an eye on them and pose them to our guest speaker. We have also entered your names into a draw for a prize to be sent out to you once the event has concluded. And this evening's prize is a copy of Dr. Saklofske's book. So we've done the draw already, and we have a first name, a second name, and a third name. So depending who's on the line at the end of the event, you'll be the recipient of that, and we'll get it in the mail to you. And now to our guest speaker. Dr. Jon Saklofske is a literature professor at Acadia. His interest in the ways that William Blake's composite art illuminates the relationship between words and images on the printed page has inspired current research into alternative platforms for open social scholarship, as well as larger correlations between media forms and cultural perceptions. In addition to experimenting with virtual environments and games as tools for academic research, communication, and pedagogy, Jon's other research interests include environmental storytelling in theme parks, values-based game design, and the critical potential of feminist war games. Dr. Saklofske notes that the construction of game experiences allows us to become conscious of, to redesign, and even to symbolically represent systems of human interaction and social, political, economic experience. This research method allows experimentation with, investigation, and tweaking possibilities, like a humanities lab space, to potentially reconstitute, recontextualize existing systems in illuminating ways and/or prototype and model other possibilities. Dr. Saklofske is already laughing at me, so and I'm hoping he's going to segue right into explaining what all of that means. And I know he has a presentation prepared for us this evening. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Saklofske, and a warm welcome to you. And over to you.
Thanks, Una. I'll start my presentation in just a second. I was just laughing because I was asked to provide, of course, a short bio for this. And how can you tell that was written by an English prof, right? Like, that was like the longest sentence in the world. So I'll try to not be that verbose during the presentation, and more entertaining, maybe, hopefully. So I'm just going to share my screen here, which will involve a few clicks, and then I'll start my presentation. Everybody can see that okay? All right. So hi, thank you so much for coming tonight, wherever you are and whoever you are and whatever you're doing. Thanks for taking the time to join us, and also thanks to Una for asking me to be part of this. So my talk is called Imagining Ourselves Otherwise, the Value of Video Games as a Humanities Research Tool. I'm not going to actually start by talking about video games, so I'm not going to jump right into the fun stuff, but this is kind of interesting. I want to start by actually talking about the value of metaphor and symbol for our ability to understand the world and to make sense of the complexity of human, cultural, social, and political practices. So metaphor and symbol, I mean, that's something we've certainly encountered before, and I want to play two clips. The first one is, and I hope I've enabled my sound properly. If not, please jump in and just interrupt me and say there's no sound. It hasn't started yet, but this is a clip from Malcolm X from 1964. And this is just me setting the stage for a little bit of a discussion about the value of metaphor. So I want to play this quickly.
You feel, however, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No. I will never say that.
Oops.
Me, if you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that's a blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull the knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there.
So that's the first example I wanted to throw at you early on about kind of the use of metaphor in communication and how valuable it is. I want to follow that up with a more recent one. 57 years later, a clip from Trevor Noah from The Daily Show. He's talking about kind of, I guess, the same social concern in the United States. And I've just lost my cursor, so we'll let him speak for about a minute or so.
But I don't seem to see that with the cops. We don't see a mass uprising of police saying, let's root out these people. We don't see videos of police officers stopping the other cop from pushing an old man at a Black Lives Matter protest or from beating up a kid in the street with a baton. We don't see that. So my question is, where are the good apples? And honestly, I believe we don't see them not because there are no good people on the police force. I think there are many people who are good on the police force. That's why they join, because they want to do good. But I think it's because they themselves know that if they do something, they're going against the system. The system is more powerful than any individual. The system in policing is doing exactly what it's meant to do in America. And that is to keep poor people in their place. Who happens to be the most poor in America? Black people. You monetize them, you imprison them, which monetizes them again. It's a system. It's not broken. It's working the way it's designed to work. And once you realize that, I feel like you get to a place where you go, oh, we're not dealing with bad apples. We're dealing with a rotten tree that happens to grow good apples. But for the most part, the tree that was planted is bearing the fruit that it was intended to.
Okay, and that's the second example of kind of a metaphoric usage in communication. And I just want to switch to a third one here. This is an example of a graphic novel, one of the kind of the graphic novels that got graphic novels on the map and differentiated them from comic books. And it was by Art Spiegelman. This is it was consolidated from a more serial publication and finally consolidated in 1991. And it's called Mouse. And it's a retelling of Spiegelman's kind of family's experience during the Holocaust. Spiegelman is Jewish, and he retold his family's story and retold kind of it was a very particular story within certainly a larger human story through a strange kind of metaphorical shift. The cats were Nazis and the mice were the Jewish people in this particular iteration. So some would say that these are reductive associations, right? Turning the Holocaust into a beast fable, or the issue of systemic racism in the US being turned into metaphors about knives or bad apples and rotten trees. But I think that these transformative actions, these representations, actually add a different lens to the issues and ideas. They approach these circumstances through a different refractive facet. It's like when you're at the optometrist's office and they put that big machine that I've got on the screen here in front of your face and they flick between different lenses and they ask, does this make your vision better or worse? So digital games, like any medium, and a medium is something that comes between the perceiver and the thing perceived, have the power to represent the world, to reflect it and refract it back to us, to see it more clearly or differently through sensory means, storytelling means, and through figurative and symbolic means. But here's the difference. Whereas metaphor and symbol alone can transform ideas or stories or subjects via an alternative association, like we saw in those examples, media forms can transform us via their potential to evoke empathy. So have you ever cried while watching a movie? Maybe cried reading a book? Okay, so if you didn't cry at all, if you're too cool for that, then maybe you felt something while reading a book or watching a movie. That emotional intensity is empathy. So there's a clarification I have to make because, empathy and sympathy are often used interchangeably and their meanings and relations have changed over time. But in current usage, sympathy, the one on the right there, is more of a disconnection. It's more cognitive. It's a distanced understanding of or pity for someone else's misfortune, right? Like, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that, or oh, I'm sending you my thoughts and prayers, right? It's an understanding, but it's a disconnected one. Empathy, on the other hand, is connection. It's feeling with other people. It's a shared experience of feeling. The sort of the cliche is walking in someone else's shoes. So now I get to the digital game experiences. Digital games as role-playing and imagination engines have the potential to generate empathetic opportunities via not just observation, like when we're watching those videos from Malcolm X or Trevor Noah, or movies or reading books, like many other forms of media as well, but via interactive participation, in which you as a player directly and consequentially experience and make choices within certain scenarios and circumstances. So games can involve us in scenarios of social empathy and help us to develop our emotional intelligence. And I've got some examples of commercial games that are leaning towards that a little bit. But will games have the awesome potential to generate empathetic opportunities? Most of them rarely do so. So why is that? And I want to take you through a little bit of a history here, and of course the industry and commercialization and influence as well. So digital games, of course, the three that I have up here, very limited by their technologies at the time, but they were initially simple mechanics and goals, based on reflexive skill, on competition, on acquisition, right? Get as many pack pellets as you can before the ghosts get you. Shoot as many space invaders, or get a high score in Pong, right? Now, while many games have also always featured an element of creative problem solving, a lot of popular games resemble boring mechanical work. So we've got Angry Birds. That's not super boring. It's kind of fun. Candy Crush, Fruit Ninja. It's just kind of, you're going through these reflexive motions to just gain points while you're, I don't know, waiting for something else to happen in your life, right? But what a lot of these games do, these new ones anyways, is they make use of gambling features, or they prompt anxiety and determination relating to performance efficiency. Like, oh, look at the leaderboards. I remember arcade machines. It's like you'd get to the arcade and somebody else would have their initials in number one. You'd be like, oh man, and you'd have your pocket full of quarters and you were ready to beat that high score. But there's also goals of the manufacturers now, and even back then, of consistent revenue. Right, your game was short in the arcades because you had to plug in more quarters so that the owners of the machines would make more money. And similarly, there's lots of revenue generating aspects of popular mobile games now as well. And interestingly, some of these values that have kind of been around since the beginning of electronic games kind of coming onto the social scene, these values tend to align with stereotypical ideas and ideals of masculinity. Right? Independence. I'm a solo player. I'm going to play to win, right? Aggression, strength, and competitiveness. A lot of these things are baked in to some of these game experiences, almost like a tradition. The commercial game industry has largely continued to cater to that, even as digital games have become more technologically advanced. So I've got some hyper-masculine examples here, right? The Far Cry series, Doom, Gears of War, Halo, and the always notorious Grand Theft Auto, right? Now, things are changing. More recent digital games have begun to explore the medium's interactive empathy potential because game developers have been willing to take more commercial risks or avoid commercial pressures altogether by exploring different values. So I have Life is Strange, kind of looking at the lives of two teenage girls who are kind of caught up in the throes of getting older, and the kind of the trust that comes around friendship. Gone Home, kind of a coming out game where you kind of have to discover a very tragic scene of a coming out in a family. Knights and Bikes, which is just kind of tapping into the nostalgia of youth, but also precipitating kind of a cooperative mode of play. Florence, as the byline there says, an interactive story about love and life. Papers, Please, where you're playing a border guard in a fictional Soviet territory that has to kind of go through the motions of letting people through the border, but there's a lot of stories that you have to weigh differently than the rules because there's sympathy that comes into this. And I don't know if you or maybe your kids or people you know have been playing Among Us, but holy cow, a lot of people are playing that right now. And it's pretty much a trust simulator, right? There's a bunch of people in a spaceship with these little weird beings, and one of them is a murderer and everybody else is a crew person. And you have to kind of maybe suspect the murderer. And it's pretty much is a paranoia simulator, but it's also about how people, kind of trust each other, lie. It's a social simulator in terms of trust for sure. And it's a really quick game, and I think it's free on some mobile platforms, so it's quite popular. So all this to say that values-based game design is becoming more prevalent. And since digital games are participatory, interactive experiences, they can go further than metaphor and symbol, further even than a book or movie that makes you cry. So games really can ask the player to walk in someone else's shoes, even if only in a simulated situation, to experience the consequences of one's actions, to emotionally connect, share, and understand lived experiences. But of course, empathy won't automatically make someone a better person, whatever better means. But the inherent ability of games to provoke empathetic engagement, along with their long-standing element of creative problem solving, makes them really unique methods and platforms for uses other than just escapist entertainment. So games can be used, this is my thesis, as research tools. Research is a process where a method is employed to produce and gather results that help us to answer questions. Research is problem solving. Digital games as research tools involve values, problem solving, and potentially empathetic levels of engagement with an issue, which makes them perfect for humanities-based research. So what I'm suggesting is that the creation and experience of games can be used as another method of doing research and experimentation in the humanities, as another way of facilitating answers to our questions about our behavior and influence within the systems that people have created. Games are limited, though, of course, in that they're not real, and they can't possibly model all of the complex factors that impact real-life situations. But since they're such powerful interactive experiences, they're the ultimate humanities lab space, a virtual space in which the conditions can be controlled, where the affordances and constraints of systems can be tested and iterated, where builders and players can fail and try again differently next time, without causing irreparable damage in the real world. All of our technological tools, of course, though, can be misused or used thoughtlessly and inhumanly. So, games are certainly no exception. They can be used as research tools to build a better mousetrap, to make workers more efficient, to translate our actions into I can't say this, statistical data and metrics, to motivate and punish behavior, to prescribe, to condition, to control. Used in business, this is called gamification. It involves using rewards to manipulate behavior. As I said, business uses it, education actually uses this, but gamification creates toxic cultures which are hyper-focused on achievement. Talk about pitting employees against each other, right? Motivating behavior, but weighing metrics. Oh my gosh, people could, the office would become a competitive hellhole, right? But this is not how I propose that humanities researchers use games. Ian Bogost in 2011 called it out and said gamification is problematic. I'm going to use another word there. He suggested that perhaps we should look for something else. So thankfully, games can be utilized via a less exploitative approach as systems that encourage discovery and reflection. Systems where players and builders are free to set their own goals and tinker with different approaches to get there. It's a different way of using the tool. Just as values-based game design is intervening in the kinds of experiences that video game players can now participate in, values-based research design is required to determine what our motivations are as researchers, what value or values prompt the questions we ask and the ways we try to answer them. So as researchers, the construction of game experiences allows us to become conscious of, to redesign, to symbolically represent, and maybe most importantly, to empathetically experience the effects of systems of human interaction and social, political, economic experiences on different people. So there's a critic, actually a game designer named Elizabeth Sampat, and she said games are systems. Systems are often seen as cold and unfeeling. They're the opposite of emotional or provocative. So when we look at the broader world as it exists and our place within the world, it becomes clear that systems, though, are building blocks of society, of human consciousness, and the driving force for our successes and failures. Proof that a system can evoke emotion is as simple as watching a driver stuck at an unusually long red light. Right? I mean, exactly. I mean, emotions can come from being trapped within certain kinds of systems, from being constrained within certain kinds of systems, by even having affordances or allowances within those systemic relations. She goes on to say that instead of striving for neutrality, the first step to truly affecting game design is to realize that nothing is neutral. What we see as a lack of bias is our own blindness to the circumstances we live within. Much as people eventually stop smelling the scent of their own shampoo or clothes detergent, we become inured to our own circumstances and believe this is just the way things are, completely oblivious to the uniqueness of our own situation in contrast to the default conditions of people around us. And this is a really important point because in a lot, when you think of research, and because it's more the scientific method, you have to be objective, right? It's objectivity that's at the heart of truthful research and accurate research results. But the humanities are messy. I mean, I'm a literature prof, and there's bias in everything I read. There's a narrator, usually in the books I read, or even in the poems that I read. Right? There is a perspective that's being shared, and there's often multiple perspectives that are clashing with each other with no simple resolution. So I think if we also admit that game design is not neutral either, this might be a good tool for us to use. So this research method thus allows us to experiment with and investigate and tweak possibilities, as I said, like a humanities lab space, to potentially reconstitute or recontextualize existing systems in illuminating ways, or prototype and model other possibilities. To not only ask questions about how things work or how to make them better, but to question and challenge and critique systems that seem inevitable or natural. To let go of the metaphorical knife that Malcolm X referred to earlier, and to instead maybe plant new trees, following from Trevor Noah's metaphor. But how to let go of the knife? I'm not sure. I have no idea. So let's explore and create and test a number of possible options and alternatives. What kind of new trees or systems to plant? How many? How few? I don't know. Let's collaborate on a number of prototypes and collaborate with communities that this affects as well, that model new possible relationships and scenarios. Let's be transparent in the values that motivate those designs, then play through them to see what works and what doesn't in controlled conditions that demonstrate the consequences of actions without imposing those consequences on the world just yet. This is why and how we test vaccines before we release them to the public. This is why we have political think tanks and white papers. This is why we carefully work to replicate laboratory results and establish statistical validity. This is why companies test drive their products on a limited consumer group before releasing them widely. So, as such, designing games as a research method is a unique way to try to understand, to engage, to interrogate, to critique human cultural practices and perceptions. So this is much more than just role-playing or getting players to inhabit another life, though that can be part of the rhetoric of game design. Imagine designing a simulation that models how far we can push COVID restrictions until a critical mass of people refuse to comply, or tests how much restriction individual citizens or players will put up with. Imagine a game designed to experientially engage players in an empathetic, interactive situation that exposes them to the effects that choosing not to wear a PPE mask or not getting a COVID vaccine has on others. Imagine designing a game experience that makes people understand how someone who's unable to safely wear a PPE mask is affected by social judgment, stigma, and microaggressions. Looking at it from all different sides. And these are a lot of things we could bring to that humanities lab space. Here's a related example. The Cat in the Hijab is a game that was made at a game jam, which I'll talk about a little later, but this is where designers get together and for a weekend they just kind of brainstorm and they make something really quick. And some of these things that bubble up from this sort of marathon sprint of game development are pretty powerful and impactful. And this is one that was created a few years ago, the Cat in the Hijab, which places you, the player, as a cat with a hijab in a subway, and people come up and talk to you, and they make comments, both negative and positive, and that dialogue and conversation. I mean, you are not forced. You choose to play, of course, but you choose to play this perspective that might not be familiar to you, or might be familiar to you, and this is maybe a way to do it so that you can encounter some of these situations prior to being in a real subway and perhaps getting, again, some of these microaggressions and macroaggressions as well. But there's more to this. Instead of maintaining an essential hierarchy between researchers and subjects, right, between designers and players, I've come to understand that the more important aspect of using games as research tools is the knowledge that comes from being a designer or a builder. So like any research project design process, as you design the simulation of a system, you need to become hyper aware of the parameters that constitute such a system. You have to confront that complexity. Emma Westacott, an amazing game researcher who works at OCAD, Ontario College of Art and Design in Toronto, she's said a few things that coincide with what I'm saying here today. I'm really kind of I respect her so much, and I've actually learned so much from her as I've moved along in my research. And in a presentation she gave called Games as Research Tools as well, she said, making is a research act. Making is a way of thinking about things. Making is a process of interrogation, but also provides an object to think with. So, you know, making something is research, right? Research is a design process. We design our experiments. We have to understand what's going into those experiments and what factors we need to include and not include, and what we have to, you know, kind of anticipate, right? She goes on to say conclusively that the game design process is a great framework for posing research questions. So linking research with critical making and creative acts is becoming more commonplace and more legitimate and more acceptable and more widely encouraged. Owen Chapman and Kim Sawchuk from Concordia University in Montreal talk about research creation in one of their papers. And they've put it in a number of ways of approaching the relationship between research and creation. So research for creation, so doing research before you create something. Research from creation, so the process of creation giving rise to research questions that then allow you to kind of do more traditional research work. Creative presentations of research, well, that's cool, is that you could, you know, kind of do the kind of the research creation. You could present it creatively, and that's another way of communicating your results, probably more broadly than just shoving it in some sort of academic journal and only, you know, a couple libraries get subscriptions to it. And creation as research, which I think is the kind of the most important one, the one I'm highlighting today, is creating something as a process of doing research. So using games as a research creation method relates to the ways that digital humanists are using computers and computer networks to ask new questions about the humanities, and to bring unique lenses to our knowledge and understanding and practice. So one digital humanities practitioner, Stephen Jones, suggests that digital humanities research projects, which are often collaborative and interdisciplinary, can take many different forms. And I mean, a lot of research projects in general can take many different forms, but digital humanities are unique, right? It's where we're bringing the computer to reflect on some of the questions we've asked for a long time. And they provide, again, a very different tool set for us to approach things. Jones goes on and says, in each case, the DH researcher or team of researchers builds something, usually a framework for organizing a collection of digital assets of some kind, and making them available to users, thereby addressing a research question or, and this is really important, providing a platform for further research and learning. You can create a space, right? A virtual space that either hosts data visualizations or an archive of you know, manuscripts, or a kind of an interactive game space that then provides a platform where further research and learning can be done by other members of your research community. So digital humanities is really valuable to what we're talking about right now. It's you know, kind of bringing it into the idea that I'm talking about as games as research tools and methods. Digital humanities really holds modeling and prototyping at a kind of a high level of importance. It also encourages practitioners to kind of hack and mod existing prototypes, like tweaking an experiment's parameters. Interactive and experiential models are what a lot of digital humanists are creating with their computer tools, not simply automatic simulations, although that's happening as well. There's dialogical opportunities for conversation and different types of exchange in a digital space or framework, and just experimentation and feedback. This is not totally unique or new. This is not, you know, kind of reinventing the wheel. This is, I mean, experiment and feedback is what we've been doing forever. So researchers are system builders. They're crafters, they're creative problem solvers, how to explore and test possible changes in the rules of our economic and political and social games that we already play, and perhaps don't even remember that they were created by us and for us in the first place. maybe imagining different kinds of systems altogether, how to move beyond simply gaming the system or finding a better way to win within current conditions that we find ourselves in, which is usually a zero-sum game, right? Because for us to benefit or somebody to benefit, others have to suffer. So I get to this book that myself and a couple other colleagues co-edited about a year ago now, and it's called Feminist War Games ? And what a weird title, right? I mean, first of all, these three terms, do they even go together, right? But we want to see if these three terms were even compatible, right? Feminism and war. Are those inherently opposed, or are feminists waging war all the time in terms of their ideological position? And what do games have to do with it? Well, there's a lot of war games out there, and I'm not talking just digital games. People have been using, even the military have been using war games, and not just kind of, simulations out in the field, but kind of tabletop war games to manage and strategize about their different assets. So what happens when you intersect all of these three terms, right? Should there be? Could there be feminist war games? There are feminist games. There are already war games. Could we bring those together? Also, what would a feminist war look like? Would it even be possible? Could it be prototyped, or is war antithetical to feminism? So, these questions were valuable to myself and my co-editors and to the people who contributed to the book, because if you ask those questions in relation to the simulations that we often play, and a lot of times these are commercially available entertainment simulations, what happens if we're going to counter some of the narratives that are embedded in those play spaces with some critical questions? So what we did actually before this is we set up a game jam. Acadia organized a game jam in Toronto in collaboration with OCAD, the Ontario College of Art and Design, and the Refig Research Group. And this was our kind of post for that. And a game jam, we put out a call, and for a weekend in Toronto, a long weekend, it was Friday to Sunday, about 25 game designers came together. We trapped ourselves in the laboratory with all our computer assets, and we made games and kind of helped each other make games and exchanged resources and ideas and kind of meditated on these questions that were being asked. And we asked them, should there be feminist war games? And after that, we called for and published a collection of articles that reflected on the question, the relationship between feminism, war, and games, and the game jam process. So why did we do this? Not because we wanted to generate a market for a new type of feminist war game like, hey, Electronic Arts, if you design these, you'll sell a few copies. No way. But because we wanted to provocatively ask if alternatives to our conventional mediations of war and violence could be imagined. Via such creative defamiliarization, to better understand the ways that war and violence have been culturally normalized, idealized, and glorified through media and within gaming communities. And believe me, war is totally glorified in a lot of gaming communities. So gaming then became a research method which combined playing within a systemic simulation and scenario with building or designing that scenario. So being playful builders or constructive players. So it's kind of like there's a relationship between research and scholarly communication and pedagogy or teaching that is kind of hard to separate. So actually, I teach every summer, except for COVID summers, I teach a course at the University of Victoria in the Digital Humanities Summer Institute that's put on every year out at UVic. And my DHSI course for the last 5 years has been digital games as interactive tools for scholarly research, communication, and pedagogy. And the participants come, and I've had participants who are professors and students. I've also had industry professionals. I had a military psychologist come and from the US come and take this course. It was very fascinating to talk with her. But these participants not only learned about this potential, but also created during that week we're together prototype games for use as either tools in their research or communicative aids, like to get people engaged with their research in kind of a game-like scenario, and as teaching tools. Because if you make something like that, why not use it in the classroom as well if you have that teaching capacity? And the course for the last 5 years has been going along pretty well, but now we're starting to ask new questions, and I've teamed up with a colleague from Waterloo. Her name is Lai Chi Fan, and we've transformed this course, and we're giving a workshop this summer, a shorter workshop, and hopefully going to be in person back at DHSI in 2022. It's called Using Digital Games as Critical Methods of Intervention, Advocacy, and Activism in Humanities Scholarship, which kind of raises the bar a little bit. So, research is one thing, but how can we use these things to actually stage interventions and advocacy and activism in humanities scholarship? And oftentimes, university-based scholarship and research, especially in the humanities, is often accused of kind of navel gazing, right? We write about writing, and we talk to ourselves, and we go to conferences and pat each other on the back, and there we go. We've got a career, right? And myself and my colleague Lychee were really concerned with how do we bring these things, and this open social scholarship research group that I'm involved with right now too. We're trying to bring this stuff out of the academy into the world, and then get people to ask questions with us and learn from. Not just, we've been trained in academic ways of asking questions. Let's see if we can ask questions with communities together in unique and new ways. I want to show you one more thing. This is a bit of a long slide, but Scott Nicholson from Wilfrid Laurier University has identified elements inspired by game design that can benefit research and scholarly communication and teaching methods. And he calls it recipe. So he says that games have this capacity for reflection, which can assist participants in finding other interests and past experiences that can deepen their engagement and learning. That's the R. The exposition, creating stories for participants that are integrated with the real world setting, allowing them to create their own. That's that builder and player sort of exchange, right? Choice, developing systems that put power in the hands of the participants, rather again than just having a game designer or a puppet master and then somebody who's trying to run the maze that they've made, right? Information, using game design and game display concepts to allow participants to learn more about real world contexts. Play, I love play, facilitating the freedom to explore and fail within boundaries. And engagement, encouraging participants to discover and learn from others interested in the real world setting. So this is just a nice, brief, condensed set of ideas that Scott Nicholson has advanced that suggests that games are viable, very viable aspects for research, scholarly communication, and pedagogy. Whew. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. Seriously, just the tip of the iceberg. I'm limited. I can't even see my clock. I'm probably way over time anyway. So I just want to go quickly back to my title, Imagining Ourselves Otherwise. It's something we all have the capacity to do, and the imagination is a really powerful thing. But habits of perception and practice are really difficult to break if not questioned, and they're often naturalized. So designing games as methods of critical inquiry allows us to become intimate with the ways things are supposed to work. Then allow us to imagine how things could work differently. Playing games allows us to performatively experience roles or make consequential choices and strive for goals that we might not have the opportunity to engage with otherwise. So an essential component of games is play, flexibility within constraint, right? Creative and imaginative role-playing, exploration, critical questioning. It reminds me of, I always refer back to this book because it's one of my staples it's one of my favorite books, Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll, where Alice, this little girl who says, let's pretend all the time, then decides to leave that childhood nest of gladness and go play a big chess game instead. But she doesn't realize how much power she has when she says, let's pretend. Because that let's pretend, man, kids can instantly become anything they want, or simulate anything, or kind of role play that way. Kids also do this really cool thing, which is they ask why so much, and then such an annoying way, right? Why is the sky blue? Why do we vote the way we do in political elections? My kids don't ask that when they were younger anyways, now they do. But why? Always asking why. And that's what research questions do. They ask why, they say let's pretend, and then imagining ourselves otherwise is possible. And I think games, digital games used in this research capacity can facilitate that. So I think life's too long and too short for us just to play one game in one way. Games as humanities research tools allow us to experiment with different logics, with different questions and answers, and with different forms of argumentation, to take apart systems that we sometimes don't notice anymore, and to explore the consequences of putting them back together differently or replacing them altogether. So with that, I think that's it for me for my talk. I'm just going to exit out here, go back to everybody else, and stop sharing. There we go. Hi.
Hello. Jon, that was fantastic. And I say that for all kinds of reasons, and hopefully going to properly articulate myself as I start to think through this and ask some questions of you.
Okay.
Just reminding folks who are on the line, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to write them in the chat function, or by all means, unmute yourselves and ask the question directly. We absolutely welcome that So where did my head go in all kinds of different places when you were presenting your information, Jon? In the first place, I'm going to start by sharing with you is that I have two grown adults who were my children. They're now grown adults. They both happen to be male. They both happen to have played a lot of video games in the last 20 to 22 years. I do not play video games. When you showed the Pac-Man and I think the Centipede in there as well, I was like, yeah, that's my jam. There's my jam right there.
Okay.
So for me, I immediately go to nah, they're video games, and don't try to make it anything else. They're video games. But after your presentation, and now I'm sitting here and I mean, my degree is in recreation, which is recreation, right? So I'm sitting here going, okay, I'm picking up what you're dropping. So my first question to you, though, and I want to go way back to the beginning, is to ask you, did this start with your own infatuation with video games? Like, are you a gamer? Come clean. I want to know it all.
Yeah, no, I'll freely admit, turning one's addiction into a profession is probably a useful thing to do. Yeah, no, I've played games for a long time. Pong, Atari. My family had a Commodore VIC-20 and a Commodore 64 back in the day, so that's where I started. But I also started, it was neat because I wasn't a console kid, I was a computer kid, even though they were pretty simple computers. I started kind of programming. Like I started doing little basic programs, or kind of hacking into the game and giving myself $1 million instead of $10 or something like that. So I started peeking under the hood at an early age as well. And I think it's that kind of curiosity that drove me to say, okay, so these are mechanisms that are run sort of on algorithms. And what happens if we tweak the algorithm a bit? Oh, cool. Then I get to do this, or I can go beyond those boundaries that I wasn't supposed to go beyond, or something like that. So yeah, it was kind of a modding mentality meets a game addiction for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, and it certainly sounds like it. And as you're chatting through it, and I'm following the train of thought, and I'm following, sort of the connections you're making, and then you get to the point where you talk about intervention and advocacy, and wanting to take it out of the academy world. I mean, that fires me up. I'm like, okay, so let's take, as you say, some of this real world stuff, create these game opportunities, these recreation opportunities, to check out all the possible end results, or all the possible avenues that one can go down.
Right, and they can be prescriptive, but I would say be provocative with the games. Like make people think rather than say, okay, this is how it should be done, or you have to pick the right choices to get the reward. Like that's not what I'm saying, right?
Right, and you're absolutely right. And I think that's where I come back to in the very limited experiences that I've had with gaming. And please believe me when I say that's when I'm walking through the rec room and I pause for a moment to make sure that my sons are still breathing. And I might see, 30 seconds to a minute of this game, and I just kind of walk away going, whatever. So when you talk about that prescriptive piece, isn't that the way isn't that kind of what currently exists? So don't we still have a long way to go on that, on moving past that prescriptive piece?
Right. I mean, and we have that in books, and we have that in movies. We have that in other media too. We have kind of the parables and the Aesop's fables and things that teach us a lesson. But then there's these, stories that I teach in my, undergrad and grad English classes that the students go, can you just tell me what this means? Can you please, what is this trying to tell me? And I'm like, well, let's ask some questions, because it's not cut and dry. And I have this little kind of, a phrase that's about, it's confronting complexity. Like, how do we confront complexity? And I mean, as I was saying with games, I mean, the systems we create in a game-based representation of anything is going to be reductive. We are going to leave stuff out. I mean, there's even popular games like Civilization, which simulates human civilization. Oh my gosh, it's so reductive, right? At the same time, it's there's enough of a complexity there that, as I said, kind of in a lab space, we also don't want the wind to blow in our physics labs when we're measuring pendulum arcs and stuff. So if we control conditions, but we select those and then are transparent about the values that are guiding the questions, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah.
And look at how, I mean, as you said, how many hours do people put into games on the consoles, on their computers, on their mobile phones? So many hours. And it's not like I'm saying that's wasted time, but it's how, I mean, if people are interested in using that to not just be distracted or kind of wait for the next text message to come in, so they have to play a bit of Candy Crush or whatever. Like, it's just, there's other, using our time that way, that can be pretty provocative. It's like, that's why a lot of people as adults kind of continue to read books. We're not looking for lessons. We're looking to be, escapist or entertained or provoked. And yeah.
When you were describing a lot of the connectivity, one of the places I went in my head to try to draw these analogies and try to understand everything that you were presenting was the one game that my sons played a lot, that I felt like I understood a little bit better than some of the other games, and that was Minecraft. I think it's called Minecraft.
Yeah.
And so, as you're explaining that, I'm it made more sense in that box for me to go and sort of say, okay, so that because you're creating and sort of pulling in the variables that you want to pull in, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to.
I love Minecraft. I was just going to, sorry to interrupt, but it was like, I just actually did a presentation in January on Minecraft at a conference. It was a virtual presentation. I didn't travel anywhere, just to clear the air. No, because it's funny, my daughter is addicted to Minecraft, and we're always like, oh no, like, it's like TV was evil back when I was a kid, and, so was heavy metal and Elvis at various times. It's like all of these media can be seen as dangerous, but I'm watching her create. And I'm watching her do this, and she's setting up, servers to go with her friends, and she's adding mods in there, and she's doing all this stuff. And it's like she's using command line stuff to get a Harry Potter mod going in her Minecraft thing. And I'm like, this is incredible. And she's 12, right? And I didn't even do that with my Commodore 64, but she's doing it for the purpose of that entertainment. But it's still, there's a lot of skills going to it. But Minecraft is an awesome metaphor for what we do as researchers. We mine and then we craft. We go and gather. As a humanist, I go and read all of these books, and I read all of these sources, and I look at all these primary sources, and then I take that raw material and I make something new out of it, and I share that with the world. That's, Minecraft is what we do at university.
So exactly that point, why I was way more okay as a mom when they were playing Minecraft versus when I walk by and they're playing COD. So I at least know the abbreviation, Call of Duty.
Call of Duty, yeah.
But and whichever word I want to use here, I want to go back to sort of the very beginning of your presentation and say to you, when you were talking about empathy, right?
Yeah.
And your claim about games as being a potential source of empathy is questionable. I've seen people play Call of Duty, my sons, and there's no sense of empathy at all. So you got to talk me through that one.
Okay, no, I totally get that. Call of Duty isn't designed to take advantage of the empathetic potential of games at all. Call of Duty is a power simulator. It gives players adrenaline, it gives them a fantasy of power, rewards, and positive feedback, points, achievements, leveling up, access to new gear, weapons, access to new story levels for killing enemy soldiers. And often those enemy soldiers are racialized. Of course, the US and its Western allies are at the center of this. There is an inherent value politics to that. So a lot of times when you're playing, because it's so engaging and so immediate, you don't have a chance to sit back and go, let me critically analyze this, right? So yeah, I get that. I mean, and that's what I think, kind of earlier what I was saying in the presentation is it's the kind of values and systems that are built into a game's design. Yes, there will always be, there's always going to be, Jerry Bruckheimer movies, which is that the right director, which everything explodes and everything's incredible and it's like action and over muscular men, saving people and stuff. And there's always going to be movies like that. But there's also some pretty incredible movies that are also out there. So yeah, I'm not saying like, there's so many different genres and so many different practices of games. And so why I wanted to call attention to the values and systems that are built into a game's design, and the behaviors that such systems encourage in players, I think that's really important because games are designed to be addictive, right? They're designed to be to fulfill power fantasies. But here's a little anecdote, and I don't know if this is just, maybe this is, maybe I'm not a good dad or maybe I am. But when my son wanted to play M games or rated mature games, because there is a rating just like any other media, there's the mature and every 110 and up rating and those kinds of things. And so he, all his friends were playing Call of Duty and he wanted to play. can't even remember how old he was, 13, I think. And he was like, oh, all my friends are playing. I'm like, wow, what irresponsible parents. Incredible. But I said to him, okay, I'll tell you what. You can play these games if you tell me why it's fun to shoot someone in the head. He kind of stopped and he's like, what did my dad just ask me? And I said, look, if you want to play these games, you're going to be, and you get bonuses for headshots in Call of Duty. You get tons of bonuses for hitting somebody in the head with a bullet at long range. And so I said, why is that fun? I said, I want you to tell me why it's fun and then you can play. And it was hilarious. For like a year and a half, the kid was like coming to me every week with like, okay, so, and some of the answers like I can't even share here. They were pretty horrific, which is why he couldn't play those games at the time. Because again, that's the maturity rating is there for a reason. That there's kind of the understanding of the values wasn't there, that kind of critical understanding. I would argue that a lot of gamers still don't understand the critical values in COD. But finally he came up to me and he said, and this was like, he was like just 14 and a bit. And he said, Dad, I got it. And I said, okay, let's go sit down. He goes, it's not fun to shoot somebody in the head, but the games make it fun because of the rewards they offer. They're making it fun for me. And I don't know what to do with that. And then we had a huge talk. And that's it, right? And it's just, it's not like I'm not sitting here like a moral majority parent saying we have to stop playing Call of Duty. Let's, ban Grand Theft Auto from the shelves. I play those games myself, right? But I also realize what those are for. And there's escapist entertainment, kind of like any Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie from the 80s. Or I can go to something a little more cerebral, or I can take this medium and say, okay, how can I harness the inherent powers that draw so many people in and do something with it, useful.
Right, that's right. And that story is great, and good on him for struggling with it for so long and then producing that. And as you're telling that story for everyone who's watching, Jon, couldn't they just go back to the martial arts studio where they were so many years ago? So
exactly.
Our sons were in martial arts together. It was kind of like, can we go back there for a bit? And
right.
that addictive piece, I mean, my goodness. And you're right. That's sort of what it comes back to is that that rewards based, and that sort of wanting to keep going. Folks who are listening, I'm asking all the questions. I'm keeping an eye on the chat function just in case someone else wants to ask a question. Please, by all means, I don't want to hog our guest speaker here this evening. So I'll keep an eye, as I say, and I'll. Yes. Hello, Nancy.
Sorry, I'm in my car, so you don't have my video because you'd just be looking at the ceiling, I think. And my dog's here, so who knows what's going to happen. Jon, great presentation. It makes me want to go back to school, for one. I want you to be my prof. Dogs, don't hang up on the thing. Okay. And my question is actually around, well, I'm just learning about digital humanities. Like, that's sort of all new to me, but I'm really intrigued. And I'm wondering if you can speak at all about the makerspace, STEAM space. Do you have any connection with that at Acadia, or do you foresee a connection, for your students? Anything in this area? When you started talking about creating, I guess that's where I started going, digital humanities and the makerspace, or am I out to lunch?
No, you're not. I mean, and there's a lot, right? I mean, there's a really broad, this is a great question. There's a really broad kind of movement right now about critical making. So making is a way to sort of, again, work through ideas, like try to, kind of either recreate something or create another kind of system or mechanism or something that maybe works better than Matt Ratto is a critic who kind of started this whole push in digital humanities about critical making. A lot of his stuff is kind of hands-on actual stuff, though, like it will be 3D printing and a lot of kind of construction, even like, paper construction. And by the way, when I talk about games as well, I'm really into the digital game stuff, but there's also, making board games, making tabletop games, and, even things that get people around a table talking about kind of some sort of virtual imagined space that's kind of, symbolically represented on the table. I think that's possible to do as well. So yeah, I mean, Acadia has its new STEAM space, and there is an A in there, which is good. So it's not just STEM. So the arts are in there. And there's a lot of potential to that. I've seen so many people employing that critical making aesthetic in a lot of neat and cool research ways, even in literature. There's somebody who's actually 3D printing geometrical shapes that represent poetic meter. And I thought that is, like, I don't know if it's going to be successful or not, but it's a pretty neat experiment. and this isn't at Acadia, this was at this is somewhere in Ontario. But there's a lot of potential for that kind of critical making. I mean, the nice thing is the space is good to get people together to think. I mean, it's that sort of jam space where you can have whiteboards on the wall maybe and Lego all over the tables and things like that. But for me, the digital, I mean, those game jams, for instance, get people in the rooms. We're all sitting at our computers, but we're there for 10 hours a day or whatever, and we can wander to different people's projects and ask what they're doing. So that kind of thing. If a Steam space, and it doesn't have to have the 3D printers there or whatever. If it had a few computer, and which it does, it has computer terminals and stuff, and you can jam together. It's kind of like musicians who jam together and come up with improvisational new ideas as they work together that way. One thing I'm not sure if the Steam space has VR stuff, but I've been working independently with VR, virtual reality based stuff, because virtual reality is taking quite a leap, and you can create web-based virtual reality spaces that, I mean, really doesn't require a lot of coding beyond HTML and a little extra now. And you can create some pretty significant stuff in short order, and there's a lot of open source code. So there is a lot of potential there for sure. And I think the neat thing about the Steam space is it has many possibilities built in. So in that's certainly one of them that could be bracketed in there.
Boy, learning spaces have come a long way from bathhouses back in Greek and Roman times, eh? But all for the same purpose, right?
Yeah.
Exactly what you're describing. So
and sorry, one more quick thing is that I'm thinking of back to your question about Call of Duty, and multiplayer spaces on commercial games are usually really toxic environments, right? That's where you go in and you hear all these like the words that you didn't think you knew, or wow, it's like, and these are like 12-year-olds yelling at each other and thinking, what kind of behavior is being encouraged and systematized here? But here's the interesting thing. I mean, these are defined in COD, for instance, by player versus player environments. And a Steam space is anything but. If Steam space was competitive, oh my God, it would be destroyed in a week, right? So what if I have a question kind of in my notes. What if there were multiplayer spaces, even online, that required hundreds of people to work together to solve a problem or overcome an obstacle? I've seen people in World of Warcraft do that. They've had to go together and gather 60 role players together to defeat whatever monster the developers are putting in their way. 60 people coordinating stuff in unison, that's pretty awesome. So.
Yeah. Pretty cool to watch, and you're right. I've heard many of those discussions and chosen to forget a lot of them. Certainly have dialed in a little bit on the example that you just gave. I still get lost in the fact that all the weapons you've collected are just right there in your backpack. I'm like, wait a second. That's not real. So Jon, we're getting very close to the end of our time, and I do like to wrap up right on time as folks have joined us this evening. Most importantly, you, and I don't want to take too much of your time over the time. But I'm going to ask one last question, if I may, and just kind of put it out there. And you sort of touched on it during your presentation, but I'm going to ask it very pointedly. What's wrong with current forms of research?
Nothing.
Right at the end for that one?
No, yeah. Nothing's wrong with current forms of research, but here's the thing. So our methods of research in the humanities tend to be pretty limited, right? We've got our signature research methods. In literary studies, we read a lot and then write about writing. Yay. I'm not putting it down, but it's like, what? We're writing about writing. How crazy. In history, there's a lot of archival research and archaeological site visits and stuff, right? In sociology and psychology, there's statistical studies of human behavior in controlled conditions, surveys. In philosophy and politics, there's all this abstract thinking through concepts and ideas connected with historical events and anecdotes and things. So the digital humanities, I think, is really opened up new tools, right? Like the Steam space opens up new possibilities, some interesting avenues for new research possibilities. So digital humanities, not just as game studies, we've got big data analysis, we've got simulations, we've got data visualization, which I actually worked in for a while about 4 or 5 years ago. Other forms of media visualization, like audio spectrometry, is coming into like analyzing poetry readings and stuff. Image manipulation. So digital game-based research is connecting existing humanities research methods. It works. Why get rid of it, right? But connecting that stuff and those understandings and methods to critical making and research creation methodologies. So it's kind of more of an expansion rather than just kind of doing what I was taught. I learned to do something. Instead of just repeating that, I'm hoping to kind of increase that circumference.
I'm with Nancy. I want to go back to school. I mean, this is sounding, it's like I'm sitting here going, cool. you know. So lots of opportunities, and very exciting. You're clearly very excited about it, John, very
I love this
passionate
stuff.
about it. So, yeah, no, and it is clear. It comes out in your presentation. And Acadia is very fortunate to have people like you, professors like you, who are so excited and passionate about what you do. So thank you.
Thanks.
Couple of housekeeping items as we wrap up, folks. The draw prize winner, who will be receiving a copy of your book this evening, John, is Elizabeth Knox. I want to make sure I got the name properly there. Yep. And so we'll be sending that out to you. And just a reminder, as I said at the very beginning of the session, that we are taking the month of May off for our regular virtual event series, because we have our annual general meeting that we hope folks will join us for on May 8th. And then we have our alumni award celebration on May 31st. So thank you, everyone who's on the line this evening. Thank you, Nancy, for your question. We have recorded the session, and we will post it on our events landing page so that folks far and wide and for a long time to come can experience it. And thank you, John, so much for your time this evening, for sharing your words with us and your excitement and where you're going with this. And we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and keep playing, everybody. Seriously.
I'll be sure to tell my sons. Thanks very much, John.
Take care. Thank you.